did you stay at the little community center that was in Kentucky, like just inside the border? It was like a gymnasium. That's where this little bear came from. And then he went the whole way across from there.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Their swing set outside, it was like exactly the same as the ones I grew up on in the 70s. And at that point in the trip, I was like feeling really weird, like really like alone in a certain way. And anyway, like I basically sat on a hillside and had this little talk with myself, because it was like I was on a swing set and I was like 5 years old and I'd run away from home on this bicycle. And it was like this true like regressive experience. And I was like sat on the top of this sliding board, and I was like, like if this sucks too bad, like I'm gonna take care of you. I was like, I've got money and I've got this bicycle and all the camping gear. And I was like, so we're either gonna like have a good time and it's gonna be good, or like it doesn't have to happen and we can just go home, because like I've got this credit card and we can get on an airplane. And anyway, like it was a real moment for me. It was the first time I had been alone like that and truly felt that alone ever. And that's when I grabbed that little teddy bear, and I like that was like the deal I made with myself. Kind of like Olivia mentioned last night about like her contract with the universe. Like that was like, it was getting in touch with like, it was this very innocent and vulnerable part of me. And it was like honoring that. But it was also like being grounded in the moment and being, look at what we have here. Like, this is what we have. We have this bicycle, we have this stuff, we have this trip, Anyway, that one little bear was left out sitting on one of those tables. And I thought they wouldn't miss the one little bear, and so he's been with me since. But anyway,
I love that. I love that story. That's I love like I'm glad I listened to Olivia's interview, but yeah, that like contract where she, equally said just like, either we're gonna die or not. I'm going out there. Today we are joined by Mark Roland, who is a former U.S. Army Special Forces officer. Hopefully I got that correct, with over 25 years of military experience. And we are talking today about cycling with PTSD and sleep apnea. And I just have to take a moment to thank all of our Patreon supporters here at Miles of Portraits, Ortlieb, Rad Power Bikes, all the other brands that supported this summit that is just celebrating people who are breaking down barriers using a bike. And there's so much. We were talking before this interview. It's really amazing because Mark, Annalisa, and I met on the TransAmerica Trail, which is designed by Adventure Cycling that goes from the East Coast to the West Coast. And something that I think about on this experience is, a lot of times in life, we're told to meet people with different views, different backgrounds, and it's often very hard for us to do that just in our day-to-day lives. And I always look back on the TransAm as getting to know more about our veterans and more about, the issues that brought them out onto the trail. And so with that, Mark, I was just wondering, why were you out on the TransAm and what group were you with? And I think you already gave us a great teaser that you also weren't a cyclist before all this.
Right. No, I had 21 and a half years of service. You were close. Some people draw a distinction, but anyway, I was medically retired from the Army in 2016, and after multiple trips overseas to different theaters, the largest and more intense of which was being 3 times to Afghanistan, I developed PTSD over my time in the military, and it just came to a point where it wasn't healthy for me to stay. And so I retired, and I also divorced very shortly after that. So, basically the 2 foundation relationships in my life were severed. And I was interested in hiking the Appalachian Trail, actually. But I also have sleep apnea, and that's the OSA that you saw in the title of my presentation, obstructive sleep apnea, which means basically that the tongue just falls back and closes the palate in this cycle of sleep, and stops the airflow. And so then your body has to jolt itself awake, and it sends a bunch of startle hormones, stress hormones around to get you going again. And it's not good for your sleep, and it's not good for your long-term health. So I use a machine called a CPAP machine that pushes air in and just holds that airway open so you can breathe normally. But I couldn't hike with that. At the time, I didn't know of portable devices, and I was with an organization called Warrior Expeditions, and they sponsor veterans and put them out on hiking trails, and they also have a paddle trip down the Mississippi, and this bike trip was in its first year of public operation, and the founder of the organization offered to me, like, hey, you could use your CPAP on this bike trip. I said, sure. So that's what got me on the bike trip. And it wasn't that I disliked bicycles or that I didn't want to ride across the country. It was just that was a shift. And what I needed was a place to get recalibrated. What I needed was some time with others and with myself, though. And so I kind of trusted that this trip was going to do that, and it did. So I'll try to keep the answer to the question. And that's so in 2016, I had a couple very major changes in my life. And in 2017, I embarked on this trip to basically reset my entire central nervous system and to get in touch with myself and to figure out how to deal with these symptoms that were causing me a lot of stress and a lot of problems just across the spectrum of my life.
I know with Warrior Expeditions, there was other veterans in that group, as well as other people who are carrying sleep machines. I'm not sure those are also for sleep apnea. And I was just wondering, how are you feeling being surrounded by a group that might, in theory, get it, as we often say in the type 1 diabetes world?
That's a really interesting thing, and accepting how it goes is kind of part of what was stretching me at the time. And that is, the idea wasn't that we had to be joined at the hip or we had to travel as a cohort. There was flexibility in that, and as you know, we all have different riding speeds and styles and things like that. But at the same time, the idea was that a group of veterans would kind of gel together and share their experiences and go through this together. And as life unfolds, people are people. And putting a group of veterans together and say that they get it, yes, on certain levels they do, because of a common shared experience in the type of training and the type of environment and the type of culture that the military fosters. But then on the other hand, it's kind of like saying you have 3 people from New York City. You guys all clearly get it, so you're going to get along, you're going to enjoy each other's company, your personalities are going to match, your life goals and interests are going to align. There's just as much of an assumption in that second as there is in the first, and that was to think that we were all just going to automatically gel. And we had 4 wonderful people on that trip, but for whatever reason, the gelling of that particular group didn't occur. And I don't hold that as a bad thing or as a mistake, but dealing with that as it unfolded was part of dealing with the trip for me, and I'm sure for them too. That was, we got along fine, but there were some people wanted to ride differently than others. Some people had different life needs than others. Some people had different relationships that kind of were fostered while on the trip. And these all took us in subtly different directions. But what's interesting was that was the beginning, and it also carried through to the middle. And one rider was struck by a car, so he only got through Kentucky. But I know for my part, and I feel it from the others, that we all really did get to know each other very well. And we all really respect each other and care for each other. And we all understood that what was happening wasn't an individual thing or a personality thing. It was really just the trip doing what it needed to do for each of us. But the group we only really stayed together for maybe the first few states. After Kentucky, that was all done. I did see Gil again in Kansas. I actually rescued him in Kansas. His bike had broken pretty severely, and a very kind bicycle store owner let me take his car. The first time I'd driven since I left, and we went back and got Gil and got his bike fixed. And then I was there when Gil finished a week later. At the end, I hung around and waited for him to come in, and I waited and got to see Annalisa and Steven come in also, and it was really neat, yeah.
we can talk about the end, but maybe go into the beginning when I first met you. Since I joined the group about a week late, I actually came in. That's where the adventure cycling. So adventure cycling puts on a supported group, or you have the tour leader. So there's 13 people on the trail, and it's kind of bike touring is like hiking, where there's kind of a popular season. So you have this group where we piggyback on each other. And when I joined, my first impression of you was actually you doing yoga. And about 2 years later, another rider that was part of the group, Maggie, she said something that Mark left me with on this trip was this focus on the breath. And it was something that I also think about with you is your practice of focusing on breathing and yoga. And I was just wondering, is that a practice that was in part your journey with PTSD? Is it just something that you brought along on the trail and continue to try to bring into your life? Or maybe just talking about that relationship and maybe some of the tools.
That's the whole thing. I mean, that changed my entire life, just focusing on the breath. I had done my first yoga class in 2015 while I was still in the Army. So I was very fledgling at it. And then after I got out, I was very intent on it, and still learning. I was going a ton though. And a friend of mine gave me a book before the trip by Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese monk, called Pieces Every Step. It's a tiny little book. It's about this thick, and it's almost 2 or 3 minute readings. And I had this, I'd done a ton of like the cognitive based therapy, and it had worked for certain things about my symptoms and such. And the sleep apnea machine was working at night to get a good baseline, a good level sleep. But I have got this really, really dysregulated central nervous system. And what I knew was the breath connection could help. It's the one place where the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, we get a conscious inject into what's normally a subconscious state, that breath cycle. So the small, simple little techniques that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about in that book were what I was using on the trip while I was riding on the bike. And what I told Maggie was the very frontier of what I knew at the time. I had only just been using it from Virginia and using on those hills in Kentucky. And when it was in Whiteville, where we were at the shelter, in Whiteville, I'm not sure pronunciation. But anyway, what I was giving her was the freshest and best that I could possibly give, as far as like just how the trip was working for me and how to be connected and how to be in the moment. But it was also working for the cycling itself, because the funny part is it just gives your body good oxygen, and it helps you be aware of your own state, and it helps you kind of regulate the quite literal ups and downs of the trail. So my goal was not realized yet of it helping me actually become more emotionally open and balanced, but physically I was already experiencing a benefit from it. I practice it every moment that I can stay aware of it, and it's changed everything in my life, Eric. It's helped absolutely everything. So it's simple, it's easy, it's non-invasive, it doesn't challenge any other belief you hold. It's the most simple and benign thing we can do. And it's the only thing worth hearing from me for this whole talk. It's just like focus on your breath and feel your breath, and things will change.
I love that wisdom, and I also think about something simple doesn't mean it's easy.
No, not at all.
And it can probably continue this, but you referenced Robert was hit pretty early on in the trip. Luckily for anyone listening, he's okay. But I remember that was a moment for me, and I think throughout the summit, especially with Olivia's talk about fear, where everyone tells you like, watch out for cars, watch out for the dangers of the road, watch out for this, and you usually brush it off or say this is something I won't have to worry about. And then when Robert was hit, that was definitely a low point for me, because it was like a few days into my trip, and I was like, whoa, this is a real, but then we also had these extreme highs. I think about the watering hole that you and I got to swim in, or also
Oh, yeah.
you and Taylor, doing bike yoga or
Oh yeah.
all those good things. But I was wondering, something I think about is those moments that you and I would talk for, 3 hours, whether it's in a coffee shop or a McDonald's. And I was actually just wondering, like, what were the middle moments like for you?
I think for me, it's what I needed and it's why I was out there. What a middle moment was like for me was that um, it was like a clean whiteboard for me to go through this process of basically learning to connect with any emotions and to give them a place and to give them non-judgmental space to just get out. And that was the technique in the little book I was reading. And I trusted it. I trusted that it would work. And so being there on a road, being a random person, it's kind of funny because you're out in the public, but there's often nobody around or very few people around. And if I'm laughing like an idiot or if I'm crying my eyes out, I'm just a nut on a bike. No one's ever going to see me again. So you're in public, but it's very safe as far as like at least when you're moving, you're not getting the interactions or anything like that. But so I experienced a range of emotions that I had not felt since I was a little kid. And I was able to just feel them and process them. And I was able to see how PTSD worked in my own body. Because if there's a stimuli that you can blame it on, like a car or an other or an event, you're just reacting to that stimuli. But it's interesting when you can place yourself in a situation absent of other stimuli and you still go through the cycle. And then what happens is, it's like Olivia, she spoke so directly to this mechanism, and that is, there's really, the choice is you accept that and you feel it and you go through it, or you just stay stuck there. And I knew I wanted better. I knew I wanted to get through it somehow. So for me, a middle moment, I went through that, I cannot tell you how many thousand times, just over and over and over on the trip, whether it was feeling good, whether it was feeling bad, whether it was feeling just just medium. It was the process of just being with myself and having that environment what was the trip, what was the ride to experience it in. That was the place where this healing could begin for me. And it absolutely worked for that. So that was a middle moment for me. And then all those other things that we all have in common about the experience are all these deeply, deeply imprinted, like you're mentioning, like highs and lows. Like I almost got myself hypothermic riding into Damascus because I stayed too wet for too long. Or that day in Johnson shut-in, like that's like a highlight day of my entire life. I don't know if life like gets better than that, And so those are there, and that's like that indelible imprint of that experience that we had. So, but the middle moments for me were going through that central nervous system kind of stimulation, and then calming, and then reset, and just doing that over and over again.
Mm, thanks for that, Mark. I remember one comment, I believe it was actually from Gil, was I was known. So one, we had to wake up very early in the morning, sometimes at like 3 a.m. in Missouri. And it was interesting for me as a participant also, the veteran of foreign wars was a place alongside of the warm showers, alongside of the type 1 diabetes community, alongside the strangers that would host us. And a lot of times, since we woke up so early, around like 11 or 12, you'd find me passed out on the side of the road somewhere really random. and I remember, I think it was Gil who made a comment saying, like, Eric, sometimes when I was getting so worked up, I would turn the corner and see you passed out on the road, just so relaxed, so at peace. And I think what he was trying to get at was, as he was getting worked up from a lot of these triggers and stimuli, here's kind of this other example of someone who's just relaxed, enjoying the experience. And that's something I really felt like it was a gift to experience on that 3-month journey together. And something Annalisa was saying before this interview was that some of the benefits or some of the relationships, might take now 3 years later. And I was wondering if you could, in as best way as you can, describe just how going on a bike ride across the country changed your life.
I'm glad to say it worked for what I intended it to work for, because that's hard. And that's not the nature of an expedition. You generally, I feel, uh, you know, when something is that long and that variable, entering it with an expectation of what's going to occur is really set up for a lot of disappointment. Like you really have to be open to what unfolds. That's just the nature of it. But what I like, what tied it together for me was that being physically there is central to the experience. We power the bike. The bike won't move without us moving. So for like you and Annalisa, it's monitoring that blood sugar constantly. You have a constant grounding to your physical reality that you cannot abdicate. That keeps you very present. For me, it was the PTSD. My emotional upheaval caused me to have to do a lot of reality testing and a lot of downregulating and a lot of checking in to say, okay, I am feeling like this, but what is the actual situation around me? And the nice thing about any kind of adventure thing, like long distance hiking or biking or anything like that, is you're responsible for yourself, your hydration, your nutrition, your sleep, and it's up to you to monitor that. You know, you can't go nuts on a big hill just to pass out that afternoon, and you have to do this months on end. So it's very continual. So that grounding in myself helped keep me in myself when I was very, very disassociative emotionally and physically and psychologically. So the demand of the trip on my body gave me the grounding. And then the mechanism of going through the breath work and letting everything come out, that worked over time. But then the amazing thing is that time and shared experience build trust. That the time that you and I spent together, the time that Annalisa and I spent together, the time that Taylor and I and Gil and the cast of people that were there that populated our little experience, those are the things that bond us as humans. That's truly indelible. So we're there. Like if you think about the trip, these characters pop up, and we're just some of them, but what's amazing is reconnecting, like learning that Steven has 2 kids now is mind blowing. Knowing that I have a kid now is mind blowing. Seeing you and Annalisa go through your lives and follow your paths, and the other riders that we keep in touch with, even if it's just like seeing them, on Instagram every so often or whatever. I'm very, very grateful because what I didn't enter with an expectation of recovery, but I was very hopeful for the opportunity, and I'm very glad to be able to say that it worked. And the only other thing I'll say about that is road cycling is a risky undertaking, and balancing risk in an appropriate way is really about that's that balance. Like, so, we could respond to fears and not do things, or we could really look at the situation for what it is and make informed decisions and choose the level of risk that we feel is manageable and appropriate for us. So for me, the trip worked in both fashions. It let some of the fears fall away. It allowed for healthy risk management, and it fostered the best relationships that with some of the finest people I've ever been around. That was the hugest takeaway. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you for those words, Mark. If people have watched the Miles of Portraits Alaska series, Mark's words are actually at the beginning of one of the episodes, and it's one thing I feel very blessed as a creator that gets to weave in some of these cycling narratives to use your words, which are beautifully interpreted by so many, but also to know kind of the journey behind that. And and if people are listening to your words and maybe they're dealing with PTSD or sleep apnea, something I really appreciated about Olivia's interview, she gave, some of these practicals. And when you and I were touching base, we can start maybe with sleep apnea. I know there's some things you said, like when I started, I knew this, and then, afterwards or years later, I knew this. And so I was just wondering if someone's listening to this or they have a friend or an ally that sleep apnea is brought up, what do you know now that you might share with someone?
All right. So I didn't know this. I carried a home unit across America, right? And so that was pretty big. I don't have it sitting here, but that's a pretty big chunky piece of machinery. And I plugged it in, and thankfully with bicycle touring, there's a lot of electrical outlets, but I think I didn't have power maybe 3 nights out of that whole 2.5 months. But they make a travel unit. Now, generally insurance will only get you one machine, like probably the home unit, but like there's other options. And I think for anything that's getting in your way, so the whole thing, barriers to entry, there are so many resources to help people with barriers to entry, but it's on us to communicate what our challenge is. Even if we don't have like, even if it's only a very raw connection, like I would like to do this, but I feel like X is in the way. Like that's what got me on the bike trip, because I could bring this machine. Now, years later, I know they make smaller, lighter machines, and I carried that one around hiking for 600 miles. And now there's even a bite device. And now I'm at less than 1 pound, where I was at 6 pounds, and even more than that on the bike trip. Sleep's essential. So if you're having sleep problems, please do what you can to get sleep better. Because if your symptoms, for example, on the PTSD side, if it's irritability, cognitive problems, problems with relationships, problems with mood, like all these different things, you know, anger, whatever is coming up in your life, sleep deprivation yields 99% of the exact same symptoms. And what you're going to have to go recovery is intensive. It takes work, but it's well worth it. But without a good night's sleep, your recovery is in jeopardy on anything else you're going to work on in your life. So I really put sleep as a baseline, fundamental, life essential, right there with water and some decent food and a safe place to live where no one's going to harm you. Like, if you get those things laid down as a foundation, now you can begin to work on whatever else it is that you feel like might be in your way. And then from there with PTSD, it's about being in the moment. And Olivia spoke very succinctly to the mechanisms of fear and how it plays in our body and in our mind. To understand that helps psychologically, but when you're being triggered, it's a matter of finding some simple skills and trusting them, because that's what you're learning. You're learning to trust yourself. Your body's learning to be safe, and you're resetting a central nervous system that is using a fight or flight stimuli to try to keep you alive. It's just been tweaked a little too much, and it just needs to get back in a good zone. But it takes compassion and presence and awareness and non-judgmental observation, because whatever you're going through needs to be expressed, and it needs to be, it needs a place. So finding a safe place to go through that is an essential part of PTSD recovery, and wherever that is for you. But for anything that's bothering anybody, I feel like there are resources, and the first thing we need to do is just find it in ourselves. It's courageous to ask for help. It's courageous to reach out. It's courageous to voice your need. If you find your voice and voice it, I feel completely that it will be resourced. If you find your voice and you just say it out loud, and it might not be that moment, it might not be that day, but things will start to move. If you can find that part of yourself and just find what you need and speak it out loud. I hope that gets to it. That's how it is for me.
That's beautiful. It makes me think about one of my idols in the type 1 diabetes space is Scott Johnson, who's had the disease for over 40 years. And along that journey has also talked openly about depression and other obstacles. And he shared that sharing your own story can give people the strength to share their own. And so just being here, listening to your words, it's touched me in many ways over the years. And so I want to thank you for being here. And if you could, since that's how we've been ending each of these interviews, just in, a short little way, say like, why do you ride? How would you answer that?
I ride to find the fun in life. I didn't have that for a super long time. Like this teddy bear came from Kentucky, And riding reconnected me with the child in me that just needed a safe place to have fun and just experience it. And for whatever reason, it was the bicycle that did that for me. And so I'm really grateful. You know, I'm grateful I had sleep apnea because that's what got me on the bike. You know what I mean? Like none of this would have happened without that precursor. So anyway, yeah, I ride to find the fun in life. That's what it came down to for me.
Thank you, Mark, for that. I'll thank you again for your time, and I'll turn it over to Annalisa, who will have some questions herself and questions from the audience. But it's always, I'm just glad you're in my life.
Thanks.
Me too, Eric.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Mark, for sharing all that. So great to
Thank
have
you.
you on here. And I think it's
Absolutely.
really special for me just like remembering where I first met you, which was in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia. And I remember I was having a really tough day. We were going up all these hills and my blood sugar was like 300 at the time. And I was just kind of just taking my time. And I remember you really stayed back and like biked with me for a while and reminded me that it's okay to just follow your own breath. And I think that's just something that like has echoed throughout the rest of my life. And I always thank you for that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. In the meantime, while we're waiting for anyone who wants to ask a question, please drop it in the chat. But my question for you, Mark, is if you have any, like, if one memory sticks out from the TransAm, or if one person who you met along the way who you can share about.
Man, there are so many. The Blue Ridge, you know, that first downhill off of the Blue Ridge, we I should point out, we rode from east to west. So certain hills are going to be perceived differently for riders go in different directions. But, you know, screaming down that first hill off of the Blue Ridge, just impossibly steep and twisty. But it's just so amazing. We're just going down so going down the Blue Ridge is the first time that the bicycle yoga came into play in my life. And that was when I realized that the bike would stay up enough that you could actually, you know, take some time and do asanas, you know, even in the seat while you're flying down the Blue Ridge. And that was like true freedom. And it felt really wonderful. I got lost very badly, not very badly, but my phone died and I had no phone for about 8 or 10 days of the trip. And at the time we were stopping at David's house in Kentucky, the one that was up that steep hill. But I missed the sign to go up there. So I went out of town about 2 or 3 miles one way, and I met this very kind couple. And the man was fixing a lawnmower, but he was blind and deaf, and he was going through the motions of fixing his lawnmower. And I didn't know it, and I hearkened to the house, and the lady said, "Come on right by him. He doesn't even know you're there." And she was the kindest lady, and she was feeding chipmunks birdseed out of a bowl. And she told me how to get back to town. And I went back to town and I missed it again. And I went out the other way for another 2 miles. And then this other old couple brought me into their house and they offered me, and I chose to eat it, but they're very emphatic that I have this bologna sandwich. And anyway, they took me in and they told me all about them and all about the town. And then eventually I went back in and I found David's place and we stayed the night there. But it's those people like that you meet that it seems random. I don't believe that it is, but you meet folks right in the middle of doing whatever it is they were otherwise already doing. And they're right there. And it's like this just brilliant snapshot, like right into them. And you're kind of nobody too. You're this phantom person that rides in one side of their life and right out the other. So like there's something about that connection, because I remember a lot of people like that. People that just popped in, they were there for a minute and then gone. But like many of them jump out. So not one in particular like that, but just those people pop up and they come up in my life. Just I'll think of them.
Yeah, I think that's what's really special about bike touring, as opposed to when you're just going on like a road trip in your car, is that you really like go at the slower pace where you see like slivers of people's lives, and you meet people that you like wouldn't have met if you weren't going so slow. And you realize like how much kindness there is in this country, which I think is really special.
Meeting the racers was interesting. And then running into Doug Haluza the whole way out on the other side of the country after meeting him in Missouri the first time, that was really amazing too.
Yeah,
It
just
all
like all
was,
the leapfrogging that happens. Because I
yeah.
remember I met you at this famous house in Virginia in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's called Cookie Lady's House. And it was established, I think this old woman established it. Well, she wasn't old then, but at the very beginning when the TransAm was established in 1976. And when you walk in, it's kind of like a shrine of like all of the bike tourists who have gone by in the past 40 years. And it's like a museum. And I hope they keep it like that and preserve it. But I remember we met you in that house, and then
Yeah.
you waited for us at the finish, like what we call the finish line at the very end of the TransAm in Astoria. So it's just great how established routes like that enable you to leapfrog with all these people.
Yeah, it was really neat. I mean, it's even when you don't see people all the time, it's the fact that you're sharing this experience. Yeah, I mean, it's burned in with pain, really. I mean, like there's 2 points of contact on that seat, and anybody that's been on that seat for more than a month, actually more than like 3 or 4 days, like you know it. And I think it's, you just know people at a very deep level. You know, we all see each other in ups and downs, highs and lows, and there's this whole experience about experiencing the country, but then there's the experience that we're sharing being a cohort, just doing it in basically in the same climate, the same weather, the same season, the same conditions. It's really, really neat. And other experiences are like that too. And I think I just appreciate anything like that.
It's interesting how we were never, I don't think we barely ever physically cycled together. Like there was only a few days where we did that. And I think, yeah, our trail parents is what we call them, Doug and Donna. They talk about how, yeah, like we're never together, but that's kind of like what's special about it, is that we're still sharing this experience.
Yeah, that's what's fascinating about the bicycle is a few minutes separates you by, you know, a couple miles. You know, like just let's say an hour of travel. So if your pattern of life is you get up an hour earlier or later, and we ride essentially the same day, we will never see each other. And this was brought out to me when in Sulphur Hot Springs, Colorado. So that's well over halfway. That's well over a couple thousand miles in. And I met Taryn Rossetti, and she had been out for 6 weeks, and she had camped alone every night for 6 weeks. And she started almost within a day of you and of me and of the whole ACA horde. So,
and we never met her. I don't think, yeah, I never met her.
no, I'm trying to remember, you know, how the timing went. But regardless, yeah, and that's what's fascinating about cycling. You know, 1 hour this way or that, and you might not see a person, and you might do the exact same trip. You could travel all summer like that.
Raina is asking how your life has changed since you've become a dad.
Whew, boy.
It's a big question.
So the bicycle trip worked. And I am so grateful for that because I do have PTSD, and a child is a really big challenge. And I'm 47, and I'm new to this, brand new to this. So it's wonderful. It's amazing. I met the right partner for me. I was actually hiking. I was coming on the AT, and I stopped here. She was a friend of a friend. And it's just like a 0 day that never ended. So I moved here. So anyway, Ben is my son, and he's amazing. He's absolutely amazing. But he's also the most triggering thing that I've ever been around in my life. He's like every trigger all in one because there's such a huge amount of emotional vulnerability. And he's like right in my personal space. And of course, everything in your life shifts to the needs of this child. So there's a level of deconstruction of self that is pretty profound. So I am finding it to be the most challenging and rewarding time of my whole life. And that's saying something. I mean, Ranger School, Special Forces course, 600 miles on the AT, TransAm trip, like I've done some stuff. There has been nothing as challenging as being a parent to an infant that I've experienced. But it's a huge opportunity because every single time I'm with him, I get to grow myself and I get to learn from him. There's none of that tension in his body. There's none of that his emotional dysregulation is very honest and present and real. So he's my best teacher, and I look in his eyes and I thank him like that all the time because he's teaching me so much. He's really plumbing the depths of this for me. And it is a ton of work, but it's breaking me through to the next level of emotional availability, of presence, of grounding. And so he is forcing this growth in a way that nothing else ever could have. So I'm really challenged, and I'm also really grateful for my son.
That's such a beautiful sentiment, Mark. Just how he's like been such a huge part of your life. And I remember I've attended a few of you do yoga through the studio that you teach at in New Hampshire. And I've, during the pandemic, I've been able to tune in through Zoom, and it's been great to just, sometimes you hear Ben crying in the background, but it's so wonderful to see you like kind of just let it be a part of the room and a part of like the meditation of just accepting the sounds around you and letting it in.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. That's so much of, again, I'm speaking for myself and in my own experience, but so much of this challenge of PTSD for me is accepting the reality that's unfolding, no matter how uncomfortable that feels. And when I say the word uncomfortable, that's just the nearest English language thing I can say for just a sensation that you would do anything to get away from, a sensation that would make almost anything an open option, like just to avoid it. And so to just accept what's occurring and let my body go through what it's going to go through, but just be present enough to be okay and to just be present and just let things unfold as they will. And it's truly opened up life for me. I know I'm not the most emotive person or anything like that, but like this is leaps and bounds from where I was at, and it makes me available. It makes me open to other people, and it brings the life back in. Relationships are challenging. There are differences. There's challenges with time management. There's all these other things, but getting to appreciate just sharing time with other people is that opening, and that for me is the real recovery. Not isolating and being around people even when it feels a little tough. That's for me the challenge, like getting out there and teaching yoga or doing a talk like this. Like for me, it's the social edge that I have to keep working on. It's really easy to just back away and just be still in a quiet white room with nothing. That's easy, but bringing the life back into your life is where the challenge comes back in.
How did you deal with that during the TransAm when there were, you talk about the downsides of cycling just being that it's dangerous and it brings up a lot for you. When you were on those busy roads, how did you cope? Were there like mantras or anything that you did, or was it kind of just following your own breath?
It was really, really hard at times. The hardest moments for me were when drivers were deliberately aggressive, because I was a timid little boy, but I was also trained really well in the military. And so like if someone aggresses towards me, there's an instinctive aggressive response now. And like in Charlottesville, Virginia, someone like tried to run me off the road and they almost did it. Like I almost went into a really hard curb. And that wasn't the fight for me. The fight was not jumping in the open window of his pickup truck and just going after him. And I'm like talking myself down through this, like thinking, okay, then what? Because then he's going to wreck the truck, and then you're going to be in a car accident, and then you have assaulted this guy. And it doesn't even matter if you're right or wrong. It's just not helping, right? but Gil had an experience like that. He actually followed a car upstaged something that upset him, and he's like, and it's like, that's when you have to appreciate the ridiculousness of a disorder like this. It's like your body is being triggered and putting you in an even more dangerous situation than the one that caused the trigger. And it's like, this is where if you cannot get a grasp of what's unfolding and choose more deliberate actions, like things are just going to get silly. So the traffic out west was really hard, like in Wyoming, when the wind was blowing into our face and I couldn't hear those like triple trailers, and they would be right there and gone. And because that was almost like a near-death experience, because like you don't even know it's coming, and then it's there and it's gone. What I learned to do is just accept when that spike would happen, like when the adrenaline dump would happen, or when the real like discomfort would happen, was just like, just become aware of it and then breathe through it. There was nothing different from that than if it was an internal stimuli. But the trucks, the semi-trucks were the hardest. That section of Route 80 in Colorado, when they had us routed on Route 80, for whatever reason, that didn't seem like a great idea. But anyway, so I'm not sure if I answered the question, but it's really all of the same, and that is just being aware of your state and down-regulating with your breath. There's really nothing else to be done, because you can't make a clear decision until you get down-regulated. So otherwise, just something silly is going to happen. Like,
oh, well, thank you so much, Mark. I think I'm good on the questions, Eric, unless you have anything else.
No, I appreciate this so much, Mark, and I also just love like your sense of silliness and fun. And I just have all these memories of like legitimately just eating soft serve ice cream with Mark and like McDonald's, you know, and like I love how many of these interviews have just ended with someone talking about such a challenge or such an obstacle, and they say why I ride is to have fun. It's pretty remarkable to see how many people have reached that conclusion. So I appreciate you taking the time for us and away from your family as well. And it's always good seeing your face.
it's wonderful to see you both. I love everything you do. Thank you very much for sharing this with me, and I appreciate it. And for all the other speakers too, thank you very much. It's when we open up and share what our challenges are, I think it brings us all together, and I think it helps us all get through something, because we don't know what the other person's thing is, but like somehow when we open up about like what ours is and how we deal with it, I think it helps each of us connect with something else in ourselves. I think it brings us all together. So I really appreciate this summit that you had this weekend. Thank you.
Beautiful. I know the next talk will actually be unique because it will be with Sunny and Dale through an ASL interpreter, and that will be at 5 o'clock with Annalisa leading the conversation. So I'll be really fascinated just to see how that unfolds. And also, if you're following Miles of Portraits and Annalisa on Instagram, you'll see some of the notes that they left Annalisa as their friendship kind of unfolded. And I guess, Mark, if people actually want to take yoga with you or try to connect in that way, but are you still leading yoga classes?
Yeah, we do them either in studio, but they're also online now. Is this the place for the plug? It's a wonderful studio. It's single female owned small business, and she's a wonderful human. Margarita Dufresne owns Live a Little Fitness in Lincoln, New Hampshire, but it is available online, so anybody can do it anywhere. And they have yoga, spin, Pilates, bar, and shine. And they're really, really wonderful people, and I'm very grateful to practice there and to get to share it with them.
Beautiful. Thank you all for tuning in, and thank you again, Mark.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Annalisa. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks.
See you later.
Bye.